A warm breeze moved through the small neighborhood on the edge of the town, carrying the soft smell of bread from the bakery and the distant noise of children running through the streets. In the middle of this neighborhood lived a boy named Arvin, a quiet child with gentle eyes and clothes worn thin from long days. He lived with his mother in a tiny room above a workshop, and every day he worked small jobs to help them buy food. Even though life was hard, Arvin never complained. He always found something to smile about, even if it was small, most days. After finishing his work, Arvin liked to walk through the nicer part of town. The houses there were tall, clean, and painted with bright colors. He liked seeing families laughing in their gardens or hearing music through open windows. It made him feel as if he were stepping into a different world, a world where worries sounded softer. Sometimes he imagined what life might be like if he lived in one of those houses, though he never let the dream stay too long. Dreaming, he would tell himself, was free, but too much of it could hurt. On this particular afternoon, Arvin had finished helping a shopkeeper stack heavy boxes. His arms were tired, and his hands were dusty, but he still took the long way home. His mother would not return from cleaning work until sunset, so there was no hurry. He walked slowly through the polished streets of the rich neighborhood, where even the stone paths looked smoother. People moved with confidence here, dressed in clean clothes. Not like the patched shirt he wore. As he walked, he noticed something new. A large house at the end of the lane was decorated with bright banners and golden ribbons. Its gates were open, and the garden was filled with people carrying plates of food and glasses of juice. He saw servers walking around, musicians tuning instruments, and children in clean shoes running happily across the grass. The sight pulled Arvin closer. He knew this house belonged to one of the wealthiest families in town. People often spoke about them, how their house had 20 rooms, how their parties lasted all night, and how even the windows looked expensive. Arvin had never been so close to it before, but today the open gate felt like an invitation. He stood at the entrance, unsure if he should go in. He didn't want to cause trouble, but curiosity whispered to him. A guard at the gate looked at him but didn't say anything. Maybe because Arvin looked harmless, or maybe because the event was too busy for anyone to care. With slow, careful steps, Arvin walked inside. Colorful lanterns hung from the trees, glowing softly in the afternoon light. Long tables were covered with silver trays of food he had never tasted before. Small cakes topped with fruit, tiny sandwiches, bowls of shining candies. He felt hungry just looking at them, but he kept his hands by his sides. He wasn't here for food. He was here because of the music. From inside the house floated the smooth sound of a piano, each note warm and gentle. Arvin stopped walking the moment he heard it. He had never heard a piano from so close before. On the streets he passed, sometimes people played small keyboards or old guitars. But this sound was different, fuller, brighter, like water running over smooth stones. He walked toward the open doors, following the music like a child, following the smell of something sweet. The inside of the house looked even more amazing. Tall walls painted in soft colors, floors that shined like mirrors, and chandeliers hanging from high ceilings. People moved around him, talking and laughing, carrying gifts wrapped in ribbons, but Arvin hardly noticed them. His eyes stayed fixed on the corner of the room. There, standing proudly beneath the chandelier, was a grand piano. Its black surface shone like polished night. The lid was lifted to reveal golden strings inside that glimmered in the light. A man in a suit was playing it, his fingers moving gracefully across the keys. People stood around him, listening politely. Arvin had never seen anything so beautiful. He stepped closer, stopping just at the edge of the crowd. The music washed over him, and his heart felt strangely full, as if someone had poured warm light into it. He wished he could sit and listen forever, When the man finished playing, people clapped softly. Someone handed the pianist a drink, and he stepped away from the piano for a moment. The crowd began to shift, some walking toward the food tables, others greeting each other. Arvin was left standing near the piano, the closest he had ever been to one. He stared at the keys rows of black and white, clean and perfect. He knew he shouldn't touch it. The piano was probably worth more money than his family had ever owned. But something inside him wouldn't move his feet away. He remembered how, when he was little, he used to tap on wooden boards, pretending they were piano keys. He used to listen to street musicians and match the notes by humming them softly. Music had always made him feel lighter. But he had never played a real instrument in his life. Now, here it was. Right in front of him, his heart began to beat faster. He looked around. No one seemed to be watching him. Everyone was busy talking, laughing, or drinking juice. The pianist was still across the room. Arvin slowly reached out one hand. His fingers hovered just above the keys. He felt his breath catch. What if someone saw him? What if he got in trouble? But another thought pushed those worries away. Just one note. He lowered his finger and gently pressed a white key. A single, soft sound filled the air. It was simple, yet it felt like magic. The note vibrated lightly under his fingertip. Warm and alive, his heart lifted. He wanted to press another key. Maybe two. Maybe find the little tune he always hummed while working. But before he could decide, he heard a voice from behind him. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Arvin froze. The sound of the voice felt sharp, almost cutting. He pulled his hand back quickly and turned around. A group of well-dressed teenagers stood behind him. Their clothes looked new, their shoes clean, their hair carefully brushed. One boy, clearly the leader of the group, stepped forward with a smirk on his face. He looked at Arvin's worn shirt, his dusty hands, and then at the piano. "Did you really just touch that?" The boy asked, his voice loud enough for others nearby to hear. Arvin opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face warmed with embarrassment. He hadn't meant any harm. He had only wanted to hear the piano up close. People nearby began turning their heads, curious about the noise. The room didn't go quiet, but pockets of attention began to gather around them. Arvin felt smaller and smaller with each second. "Do you even know what you're touching?" The rich boy asked, taking another step forward. "That's not some toy from the street." His friends laughed softly. Arvin felt his throat tighten. He wanted to explain, but he didn't know what to say. He wanted to walk away, but his feet wouldn't move. The rich boy leaned in slightly. "People like you shouldn't go near things like this," he added, his voice low but cruel. Arvin lowered his eyes, wishing he could disappear into the floor. The joy he felt just seconds ago melted into a heavy feeling, like a stone in his chest. He stepped back from the piano, careful not to touch it again, even by accident. He murmured a quiet, "Sorry, I didn't mean to. I was just listening." But the sound of his apology only seemed to amuse the other boy. Arvin wished he could run away, but before he could decide what to do, more people had noticed the scene. They weren't angry, not yet, but they were curious. And curiosity from wealthy guests felt heavier than anger to Arvin. It felt like judgment. He thought maybe he should leave the house. Maybe he shouldn't have come in at all. Maybe this beautiful place wasn't meant for someone like him. But even as he looked down, trying to gather the courage to walk away, a gentle voice from somewhere behind the crowd spoke up, a voice he had not noticed before. And that small voice would soon change everything that followed. The room was filled with soft music and quiet talk, yet for Arvin, everything felt strangely loud. His own heartbeat echoed in his ears after being called out in front of so many strangers. He wished he could take back the moment he touched the piano key, even though it had felt so warm and alive just seconds before. Now that feeling had turned into a heavy knot in his stomach. The other teenagers stood around him like a small wall, their fine clothes and polished shoes making him feel even more out of place. The boy who had spoken first still wore that sharp smirk, the kind that made Arvin want to shrink. The boy's friends whispered and exchanged amused looks, as if Arvin were some sort of joke meant to entertain them. Arvin took a slow step backward, hoping to quietly slip away. He did not want any more attention. He had never wanted to cause trouble. Everything inside him screamed to leave before things got worse. But fate seemed to have other plans. Before he could turn, one of the boys grabbed the edge of the piano bench and pulled it aside a little. "Look at this," the boy said loudly. He really thought he could play it. Imagine that. A small crowd began forming again. People didn't come close, but they turned their heads, stretching their necks just enough to get a good look. Some of them whispered into each other's ears, their expressions mixed, some curious, some annoyed, some amused. Arvin couldn't tell which bothered him more. "I wasn't trying to play," Arvin said softly. His voice was so low, he wasn't even sure if the words had come out, but the rich boy heard him. "Oh? And what were you doing? Polishing it with your fingers?" He laughed loudly at his own joke. The sound felt sharp, like sandpaper against Arvin's skin. A few guests nearby chuckled lightly, not out of cruelty, but simply because they didn't know what else to do. People often laughed when they were uncomfortable. Arvin felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment. His hands curled into small fists at his sides, not out of anger, but to keep from trembling. "I'm sorry," he said again, hoping it would end the situation, but the boy wasn't ready to let it end. "Who let him in anyway?" he asked loudly. "This is a private event. Not some—" He stopped himself before finishing the sentence, but the way he looked Arvin up and down completed it in everyone's minds. Arvin looked around, unsure if he should run out of the house or wait for someone in charge to tell him to leave. The room which had looked magical moments ago now felt much bigger, much colder. Before he could decide, someone gently touched his shoulder. Startled, Arvin turned to see an older woman stepping through the small circle of onlookers. Her hair was silver, pinned neatly behind her head. Her clothes were simple yet neat, and she carried herself with a calmness that softened the tense air. She didn't look angry, nor did she look amused. She simply looked kind. "Did you touch the piano, dear?" she asked, her voice warm, not scolding, not cold, simply asking. "Yes," Arvin answered, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Just one key. I didn't mean to bother anyone." Before the rich boy could interrupt again, the woman placed a gentle hand on the edge of the piano. "There's no harm in a single note," she said softly. Her words weren't loud, but they carried through the crowd like waves smoothing over rough sand. A few guests turned back to their conversations, losing interest now that there was no drama. The main boy's smirk faded a little. "But he doesn't belong." The woman lifted her hand lightly, stopping him without even raising her voice. "Music doesn't belong to only a few," she said. "It belongs to anyone who feels drawn to it." Arvin stared at her in surprise. He wasn't used to adults speaking up for him, especially not in a place where he clearly looked like an outsider. The teenagers shifted uncomfortably. The woman didn't look at them with anger-only steady calm, the kind that made them take a step back without even thinking. She turned to Arvin again. "Come here," she said gently. "Stand a little closer to the piano." Arvin hesitated. I don't want to get in trouble." "You aren't," she said. "I'm only asking you to stand here, nothing more." The way she spoke made Arvin feel safe enough to move forward. He stepped back toward the piano, keeping a respectful distance from the keys. The polished surface reflected his nervous face. "What made you touch it?" the woman asked. Her tone wasn't mocking, it was genuinely curious. Arvin swallowed. I like the sound. I've never been this close to one before. I wanted to hear what a real key feels like. The woman nodded slowly, as if his answer made perfect sense. And when you pressed it, how did it feel? Arvin looked at the piano again. Warm, he said quietly. Like the sound came before my hand even touched it. A small smile touched her lips. That's a beautiful way to describe it. The rich boy crossed his arms. You're not seriously letting him. This time the woman didn't look at him. She simply spoke in a tone that made argument impossible. If you wish to listen, you may stay. If not, please give us some space. The teenagers exchanged confused glances. Being dismissed so gently felt strange to them. They weren't used to adults choosing someone like Arvin's side over theirs. After a moment, they backed away, muttering among themselves but no longer interfering. Arvin felt the knot in his stomach loosen a little. Do you listen to music often? The woman asked. Arvin nodded. Whenever I can. There are players on the streets who use old keyboards or wooden flutes. I watch them when I finish work. She studied him for a moment, her eyes soft but sharp, as if she were seeing something inside him that he didn't know was there. And the tune you hummed earlier, she said. The one you hummed while touching the key. Where did you learn that? Arvin blinked. I hummed something? Yes, she said, very softly. You may not have noticed, but I heard it. Arvin tried to remember. Sometimes when he listened to street music, he hummed the melodies later to keep them in his mind. Perhaps he had done it without thinking. It's just something I heard before, he said. I don't know the name. The woman stepped to the piano bench and gently placed her hand on it. Would you like to sit? Arvin's breath caught. I can't. I shouldn't. I don't know how to play anything. I've never touched a real one before today. Exactly, she said, her voice warm. That's why you should sit. She placed her other hand on her chest. I am the one asking. No one else. Arvin looked around. A few people were watching again, but not in a harsh way. More in a curious way. Some smiled politely, others whispered softly, but the room no longer felt cold. Still, he was scared. What if he pressed the wrong key? What if someone laughed? What if the piano made a loud sound by accident? You don't have to play a song, the woman said gently, reading his fear. Just sit. That's all. Taking a slow breath, Arvin nodded. He walked to the bench and sat down carefully, as if it might crumble beneath him. The wood felt smooth, and the height felt strange, just a little too tall for his legs to rest comfortably. Place your hands on your lap, the woman instructed. He did, her voice lowered, soft as a whisper. Now breathe. Let your shoulders relax. Arvin listened, his tense muscles slowly loosening. When he finally looked up, his eyes met the piano keys, again rows of clean white and deep black. They no longer looked intimidating. They looked inviting. Good, the woman said. Now, I want you to press a single key. Any one you want. Arvin opened his mouth, unsure. Now? Yes, she said. Whenever you're ready. He looked at the keys. His hand lifted only a little before pulling back. He took a breath and tried again. This time, his fingers brushed the surface of a white key. He pressed. A soft note filled the space around him. Not too loud. Not too sharp. Just gentle. He let out a small breath. He didn't know he had been holding. The woman nodded. Again. He pressed another key. Then another. A faint line of melody began forming. Something small, something uneven, but something alive. People nearby turned their heads, drawn by the unexpected sound. The rich boy and his friends stopped whispering. Their eyes widened slightly. Arvin, without realizing. hummed again softly, matching the faint tune he was tapping out. And in that moment, something in the room shifted. The laughter stopped. The whispering faded. The guests stood still, watching the poor boy on the piano bench, his fingers moving slowly, shyly, yet beautifully across the keys. He didn't know he was playing. He didn't know he was being watched. He only knew one thing. For the first time in his life, the music was coming from his own hands. The sound of the soft notes floated gently through the room, mixing with the warm air and the quiet breathing of the guests. Arvin didn't know how long he had been pressing the keys. It could have been a few seconds or a whole minute. What he did know was that the room felt different, almost calmer than before. The noise from conversations at the back of the hall softened, and the people who had once looked at him with judgment now watched with quiet curiosity. Arvin wasn't playing a real song. He didn't know any. He was only pressing the keys that felt right, following the humming in his mind. The little tune he made wasn't perfect, not even close, but it had something honest in it. Something soft. Something warm. He stopped when his fingers began to tremble. His hands quickly returned to his lap, and he looked down, afraid that he had done too much. Afraid that he had broken some rule he didn't know existed. Afraid that someone would get angry again. The hall was silent for a moment. Then a few claps echoed from the right side of the room. Arvin's head shot up. A man in a dark suit smiled at him and clapped again. Slowly, a few others joined in. The applause wasn't loud, not like a big performance, but it was soft and polite, filled with something close to kindness. Arvin felt his face warm. No one had ever clapped for him before. Not once in his life. The older woman who had encouraged him stepped beside him. "You did well," she said quietly. Arvin tried to speak, but only managed a small nod. His throat felt tight, but it wasn't from fear this time. It was something else, something he didn't have a name for. The teenagers who had mocked him earlier froze where they stood. They exchanged confused looks, as if the situation had completely flipped without warning. The rich boy who had laughed at Arvin earlier stared, not with amusement, but with something new, surprise mixed with discomfort. He clearly hadn't expected anything like this. The woman gently rested her hand on Arvin's shoulder. "Stay here a moment," she whispered. "Don't run off." Arvin nodded, though part of him wanted to disappear before the applause stopped. The attention made him feel like he was floating somewhere between fear and something close to joy. The woman stepped forward and addressed the small crowd. "He hasn't played before," she said. "Not on a real instrument. Yet you heard the feeling in his touch." A few guests murmured in agreement. A man near the back asked, "Is he one of your students?" The woman shook her head. "No, we've never met before." The man raised his brows in surprise. Arvin stared at the polished floor. He was grateful, but he didn't understand why she was helping him. People didn't usually go out of their way for him, especially not strangers from rich families. The woman glanced at Arvin again, her eyes warm. "Would you like to try something?" she asked softly. Arvin hesitated. "Try what?" She motioned toward the piano. "Place your hands on the keys and close your eyes. Don't think about the people. Just breathe. Listen inside your mind. See if something comes." Arvin felt his heart pick up speed. The idea frightened him a little. Music was something he heard, not something he knew how to create. But the woman's voice made the fear feel smaller. He took a slow breath and lifted his hands again. His fingertips brushed the smooth surface of the keys. "Close your eyes," she said. He did. Darkness washed over him, but not an empty darkness. It was filled with echoes, small pieces of melodies he had heard on the streets. The way wind sounded when it passed through broken windows, the rhythm of footsteps on pavement, even the sound of the old clock in his mother's room. He let out a slow breath. His fingers moved. He pressed a small group of keys, then waited. Pressed again. Paused. Pressed another. A melody began forming fragile at first, like a shy whisper, but slowly becoming clearer. It wasn't a real song. It wasn't something he had learned. It was something he had felt. The room leaned into the sound. People stood still, listening. Even the teenagers didn't speak. They only watched, wide-eyed. Arvin didn't realize he was playing longer this time. Maybe a minute. Maybe more. Time didn't feel real. Only the music did. The woman stood close by, her expression soft and proud, as if she understood something about Arvin that others did not. When the melody finally faded, Arvin opened his eyes. The room applauded again, this time louder. Arvin's heart jolted. He quickly stood from the bench, unsure whether to bow, smile, or run. He ended up just standing still, frozen. "You have a gift," the older woman said gently. Arvin shook his head. "No, I was just pressing keys." "Anyone can do that." "Not like you," she said. A few guests approached, curious. One woman said, "He plays with feeling. You can hear it." Another nodded, like someone who listens more than he speaks. Arvin didn't know what to say. Compliments were not something he heard very often. He looked at the floor, then at the walls, anywhere but at the people praising him. The rich boy stepped forward. He no longer wore a smirk. His face was stiff, almost embarrassed. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if unsure what to say. Arvin waited for another rude comment, but none came. Instead, the boy said in a low tone, "I didn't know you could do that." Arvin blinked. He wasn't sure if that was an apology or not. It didn't sound like one, but it didn't sound mean either. "It's nothing," Arvin said, trying to ease the awkwardness. The rich boy looked away, uncomfortable. But he didn't insult Arvin again. The woman who had helped Arvin stepped between them lightly. "Do you know your name, young man?" She asked kindly. "Arvin," he said quietly. She smiled. "Arvin, would you like to learn?" "Properly, I mean, learn?" Arvin repeated. He looked at her, confused. "Learn what?" "Music," she said. "Piano, notes, everything you've never been taught." Arvin's eyes widened. I can't. I don't have money for lessons." She waved her hand gently. "I didn't ask for money." He stared. "But why would you teach me?" "Because you already understand something many students take years to learn," she said softly. "Feeling. That cannot be bought. That cannot be forced. You have it naturally." Arvin felt something inside him shift. Hope, a small spark of it, but my work. "My mother. I have to help her," he said, his voice small. "You can still do all of that," she replied. "Lessons don't have to be every day. Just once or twice a week. Long enough for you to grow?" Arvin didn't know what to say. His mind spun with confusion and possibility. Before he could respond, the host of the event, a tall man with calm eyes, stepped forward. He had been watching everything quietly from the side. "I apologize," the man said, addressing Arvin with a gentle tone. "My guests should not have spoken to you in such a way earlier." Arvin shook his head quickly. "It's okay. I shouldn't have touched the piano." The man smiled softly. "Perhaps. But sometimes curiosity leads us to the right place." He turned to the older woman. "If you wish to teach him, you have my support." She nodded. "Thank you." The man looked at Arvin again. "You're welcome to stay for the rest of the event. Eat something. Rest. You're safe here." Arvin felt overwhelmed. "Thank you," he whispered. The rich boy looked down at his shoes. He seemed unsure whether to stay or walk away. After a moment, he quietly said, "Sorry. For earlier." Arvin blinked. The apology sounded sincere, awkward, but sincere. "It's okay," Arvin said softly. The boy nodded and stepped back. Arvin felt the tension in the room fade. People returned to their conversations, but they looked at him differently. Now, not as a stranger who didn't belong, but as someone worth noticing. The older woman sat on the bench and motioned for Arvin to sit beside her. "Let's talk," she said. "Tell me what you hear when you listen to the world." Arvin sat down slowly. "I don't know," he said shyly. "You do," she replied. "You hear more than you think." He looked at his hands, the same hands that had once only carried boxes, lifted buckets, or swept floors. Today, those hands had made music. The woman watched him carefully. "Your journey won't be easy," she said gently, "but you have taken the first step. Sometimes that is the hardest part." Arvin nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand, but something inside him knew this moment mattered. The woman continued, "When you sit at a piano, you don't just play notes. You tell stories that come from your heart. And you, Arvin, you have many stories waiting inside you." Arvin swallowed, emotions building in his chest. "But what if I fail?" She smiled softly. "Then you try again. Music is patient. It waits for you, even when the world doesn't." Arvin looked at the piano one more time. The keys no longer looked like something he wasn't allowed to touch. They looked like something that belonged to him too. The woman placed her hand gently over his. "You have a gift, Arvin. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Arvin nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. For the first time in his life, the world didn't feel so far away. For the first time, he felt seen and deep inside. A quiet promise formed, a promise that he would not let this moment fade, because maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. Here is part 4 in simple English, written in a natural human tone. About 1,700 words. The room stayed strangely quiet after the older woman spoke. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy but meaningful, like everyone was waiting for something else to happen. The boy kept his hands folded on his lap, unsure if he should stay seated at the piano or move away from it. He felt exposed, like the lights in the room had suddenly grown brighter. He looked at the older woman beside him, searching her face for some sign of what to do next. She smiled, a small, calm smile that made him feel a little safer. "Take a moment," she said softly. "You don't have to rush." The host stood there with his arms crossed, but his expression had softened. He didn't look angry anymore, more curious and unsure. The rich boy, who had mocked him earlier, lingered by the wall, still trying to appear unimpressed. But even he seemed confused by what had just happened. The boy slowly stood up from the piano bench. His legs felt wobbly, almost like they weren't used to holding him up. He took one small step back from the piano, giving it distance again. He felt grateful for the chance he had been given, but also nervous about what was expected of him now. The older woman turned toward the host. "May I speak with you for a moment?" she asked politely. The host nodded and stepped aside with her. The guests, unable to control their curiosity, turned their heads and tried to listen without making it obvious. The boy stayed near the piano, unsure where to look or stand. So he simply stared at his shoes. The older woman spoke in a low tone, but the boy could still catch fragments of what she said. "He learns by ear," she murmured. "A natural sense for tone," the host replied. Surprised, rare in someone who hasn't touched a piano before, she added. The boy felt a strange flutter in his stomach. Was she talking about him? Was she really saying he had something special? It felt unreal, like she was describing someone else. The host looked toward the boy again. His eyes weren't cold anymore. "Do you think he could learn properly?" he asked. The older woman nodded with certainty. "Yes, if he is taught with patience." Their conversation continued, But the boy stopped listening. His mind drifted back to the notes he had played. He remembered the feeling of the keys under his fingers, the soft vibration of each sound, the way everything else had faded away while he searched for the right notes. It had felt peaceful, almost magical. He didn't know music well, not the way trained people did, but he knew how it made him feel. He knew how it helped him forget the hard days and long nights. He knew how it gave him hope, even when things around him didn't. The rich boy suddenly walked toward him. His footsteps were fast and sharp. The poor boy flinched a little, unsure what he was planning to say. The rich boy crossed his arms and raised his chin. "Don't think you're special just because you played a few notes," he said, his voice tight. The poor boy looked at the floor. "I'm not," he said softly. "You shouldn't be here anyway," the rich boy muttered. "This place isn't for people like you." The words hurt more than the laughter earlier. They reminded him of something he always tried hard not to think about, the difference between his world and places like this beautiful house. He didn't want to argue. He didn't want trouble. So he stayed silent. The rich boy stepped back, annoyed that he didn't get a reaction. But before he could say anything else, the older woman returned. "That's enough," she said firmly to the rich boy. He stiffened and looked away. She turned her attention back to the poor boy. "Come with me for a moment," she said gently. He nodded and followed her toward a quieter corner of the room. He felt a little afraid, but also curious. What could she possibly want to tell him? When they reached the corner, she crouched slightly so she could speak to him at eye level. Her eyes were warm, full of patience and kindness. "You did something brave today," she said. "You allowed yourself to try something new, even when you were scared and people were watching. That is not easy to do." He swallowed. "I didn't do much. I just played a few sounds. Those sounds came from a place inside you that listens deeply," she said. "Not everyone has that." He didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever spoken about him like that, carefully, kindly, like his feelings mattered. She continued, "Have you ever wanted to learn music? Even a little?" He hesitated. I never thought I could. Lessons cost money, and I have to help my mother. I don't have time for things like this." Her expression softened even more. "Sometimes," she said, "life gives us small doors. If you walk through them, the world on the other side can be bigger than you ever imagined." He didn't fully understand her words, but he felt something warm spread through his chest. A feeling he couldn't name. The host joined them again. "Madam tells me you have potential," he said, addressing the boy directly. His tone wasn't harsh anymore, more respectful. The boy blinked. Unsure how to react, the host nodded slowly, thinking. "You touched the piano with care. Most children your age would bang on the keys or try to show off. But you approached it differently." The boy lowered his gaze. "I was scared to break it." "That fear is respect," the older woman said. "Respect for sound. Respect for beauty. That matters." A few guests moved closer, trying to listen without looking obvious. The room's atmosphere had shifted completely. Instead of judgment, people now watched with curiosity, some even admiration. The host crossed his arms loosely. "You said you listened to music in the street?" The boy nodded. "There's a man near the market who plays songs. I stop when I can. I like the sound." The older woman smiled. "Listening is your first teacher, then?" The boy wasn't sure what that meant, but it felt nice to hear. The host glanced at the piano. "Would you be willing to try again? Not to impress anyone, just for yourself." The boy looked at the instrument nervously. "Right now?" "Yes," the host said gently. He felt the weight of the room's attention again, but something inside him nudged him forward. Maybe it was the older woman's kindness. Maybe it was the memory of the notes he had found earlier. Or maybe it was the quiet hope that had been growing slowly since he first touched the piano. He walked back toward the piano bench. His steps were small, but he kept moving. When he reached the bench, he sat down carefully. The older woman stood beside him, not touching him, but close enough to give reassurance. "Close your eyes for a moment," she said softly. He did. "Think of the tune you heard near the market. Let it play in your mind the way you remember it." He pictured the old man pressing keys on his small keyboard, smiling at people as they passed. He remembered the slow part of the song, the way it softened the noise of the market. "Now," she said, "place your hands on the keys." He lifted his hands and rested them on the keyboard. The cool surface felt familiar now, less frightening. "Try to follow the sound in your memory," she whispered. "Don't think too much. Just listen inside." He took a quiet breath, then pressed a key. The note rang out, peaceful and steady. He pressed another key, then another. Slowly, the room began to fill with the soft shape of a melody. It wasn't perfect. He missed notes. He searched and corrected himself. But the tune was there, hiding under his nerves, and little by little, it came forward. Someone in the room whispered, "He's doing it again." Another said, "He's playing by memory. Look at that." Even the rich boy, who had tried so hard to appear unaffected, stepped closer, not with anger this time, but with shock. The boy kept going, following the path of the melody inside him. The notes connected more cleanly now. His hands, though unsure, moved with growing confidence. He reached a part of the tune he remembered well, the part that always made him pause, when he heard it in the market. A soft rise in the melody, warm and gentle. He played it. The room felt still again. Not heavy, just full. When the boy finally lifted his hands from the keys, he opened his eyes and looked around. People stared, but not with judgment, with wonder. The older woman smiled proudly. The host exhaled slowly, as if he had witnessed something he hadn't expected. The rich boy didn't say anything. He just looked confused, maybe even a little humbled. The older woman placed a hand on the boy's shoulder again. "That," she said softly, "is what happens when you follow a sound your heart remembers." He didn't fully understand her words, but he understood the feeling. Inside him, something glowed, small but steady. The host cleared his throat. "I believe," he said carefully, "we should talk about giving you a real chance to learn. Proper lessons. Real instruction." The boy stared at him in disbelief. "Me?" "Yes," the host said. "You?" The boy didn't know what to say. His mind spun with questions. Could this really happen? Could someone like him learn music? Could he really step into a world that once felt unreachable? The older woman nodded gently. "Think about it," she said. "You do not have to decide now, but know that you deserve the chance." The boy took a deep breath. The world felt different now, bigger, brighter, and filled with possibilities he never imagined. For the first time, he felt like a door had opened, and all he had done was touch a piano. Here is part 5 in simple English, written in a natural human tone, about 1,700 words. The boy sat on the piano bench for a long moment after the last note faded into the air. He didn't move, didn't speak. His heart felt too full, too overwhelmed to understand what had just happened. All he knew was that he had followed a small memory inside him, and suddenly the whole room had changed, that it wasn't quiet in a tense way anymore. It was quiet in a warm, waiting way, like everyone was holding their breath, unsure what to say next. The boy looked down at his hands. They were still resting on his lap, still trembling slightly. He had never seen them as anything special before. They were just hands used for lifting boxes, helping his mother, running errands, doing odd jobs. But for the first time, he wondered if they could be more. The older woman's eyes were soft as she watched him. "How do you feel?" she asked gently. He swallowed. I don't know," he said honestly. "That is okay," she said with a small smile. "Feelings can come later. For now, you did something wonderful." The host stepped forward, clearing his throat. "That was remarkable," he said. "Truly." The boy didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded shyly. Guests whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling in quiet admiration. What had begun as a moment of ridicule had turned into something completely different, something none of them had seen coming. The rich boy who had mocked him earlier stood near the doorway. His face looked different now. The smugness was gone. In its place was confusion, maybe even embarrassment. He kept glancing at the boy and at the piano, as if trying to make sense of how someone he thought was beneath him had done something so unexpected. He didn't speak, though. "Not yet." The host turned toward the older woman. "You said he has potential," he said quietly. She nodded. "More than potential. He has a gift." "A gift." The boy repeated the words silently in his mind. It felt strange, heavy, beautiful. A gift? Could someone like him truly have something like that? The host looked at the boy again. "Would you consider returning here? If I arranged for lessons?" The boy blinked in disbelief. "Lessons?" "Yes," the host said. "Real ones. With a proper teacher." The boy stared at him, unable to speak. 1,000 thoughts rushed through his mind. Lessons cost money. Lessons took time. Lessons belonged to people from different worlds, people who lived in big houses with grand pianos and knew about music, not kids who ran errands and counted every coin. He took a step back without thinking. I don't think I can," he said softly. The older woman tilted her head. "Why not?" He looked down at his clothes, old, worn, patched in a few places. "I don't belong here," he whispered. "And I have responsibilities. I help my mother. I work. I can't spend time on something like this." The older woman smiled gently. "Learning does not take away responsibility. Sometimes it gives you more strength to carry them." The host nodded in agreement. "Lessons would not cost you anything. I would take care of the expenses." The boy's heart thudded. "Why would you do that for me?" he asked quietly. The host paused, then spoke honestly. "Because I saw something today that surprised me. And sometimes, when you see a spark, it feels wrong to ignore it." The boy didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. The rich boy suddenly blurted out, "He can't really learn, can he?" He just copied something he heard. The older woman's eyes shifted toward him. Her gaze wasn't harsh, but it was steady. "Many great musicians began by copying sounds they heard," she said. "That is the beginning of understanding." The rich boy looked away, embarrassed. The older woman turned back to the poor boy. "What happened today was not an accident," she said softly. "It was the beginning of something. You don't have to make a decision, no. But I want you to know one thing: your talent is real." The boy felt warmth rise to his face. "I never thought I could do anything like this," he admitted. "You didn't need to think it," she replied. "You showed it." A few guests approached the host quietly, murmuring things like, "He's remarkable," and "Who would have guessed?" It felt strange to the boy. He had never been the center of anyone's attention, not in a positive way. He wasn't sure he liked all the eyes on him, but there was something comforting about the older woman standing so close. The host gently placed a hand on the piano. "This instrument brings joy to our home," he said. "And today you brought something new to it. A fresh sound. A reminder that talent can come from anywhere." The boy looked at the piano again. He felt a pull toward it, like the notes were still inside him, waiting. But his worries weighed him down, My mother needs me, he said quietly. I can't leave her alone. I can't take time away to learn something that might not matter in the end. The older woman's expression softened. Your mother loves you? Yes? He nodded. Of course. Then she would want you to grow, the woman said gently. She would want you to have chances that she never had. He blinked, surprised by her words. He had never thought about it that way. The host added, this does not have to be every day. 1 or 2 hours a week. We can arrange a time that works for you. The boy hesitated. He didn't know how to explain the fear that gripped him. The fear of stepping into a world he didn't understand. The fear of failing. The fear of hoping for something bigger than his life allowed. What if I can't do it? He whispered. The older woman smiled. The only way to fail is to not try. Her words settled into him like warm sunlight. Slowly, he nodded. I can try, he said softly. Her smile widened. That is all I ask. The host reached out a hand. Then it is settled. We will arrange something. The boy didn't shake his hand, he was too shy, but he nodded in agreement. The rich boy watched the scene unfold with mixed feelings. Jealousy, confusion, maybe even a little admiration. He didn't say anything more, but his silence felt different, now less cruel. The older woman guided the boy back to the piano. May I show you something? She asked. He nodded. She sat beside him on the bench, close enough that he could see the gentle lines on her hands. She placed her fingers lightly on the keys and played a short, simple pattern. The notes were soft, almost like a lullaby. Try this, she said. He watched her hands closely. Then he tried to copy her. His first attempt was clumsy. The second was closer. On the third try, he matched the pattern. The older woman smiled. You learn quickly. Very quickly. The host stepped closer, watching with interest. Incredible, he murmured. Guests began to drift back into conversations, but many kept glancing toward the piano bench, unable to fully look away. They had witnessed something special, something they would likely talk about long after the event was over. The boy continued trying the pattern, growing more confident each time. The more he played, the lighter he felt. It was as if each note removed a little piece of fear from his heart. The older woman gently corrected his hand position. Relax your fingers, she said softly. Let the sound flow, not force it. He adjusted, and the notes came out smoother. You see? She said, you are listening. That is the first step of every musician. The boy felt something inside him bloom, a mix of pride, excitement, and disbelief. He wasn't sure what the future would hold. He didn't know if he could truly become good at this. But for the first time, he wanted to try, and wanting felt powerful. He kept playing the small pattern, and the older woman gently hummed along. Her humming blended with the notes, turning the simple tune into something gentle and beautiful. When she stopped humming, she looked at him with kind eyes. You have a long path ahead, she said. But every path begins with one step. Today, you took yours. The boy nodded. He believed her. The host approached. Would you like something to eat before you leave? He asked politely. The boy shook his head. Thank you, but I should go home soon. The older woman said, Before you go, remember this moment. Remember how it felt to create something beautiful. He nodded again, though a little shyly. As he stood from the bench, he looked at the piano one more time. The shiny surface reflected his face, nervous, hopeful, unsure. But even in that reflection, he saw someone different from the person who walked in earlier. Someone who had played music, someone who had been heard, someone who had been seen. As he walked toward the exit, the room's conversations softened. People watched him go, some smiling gently. The rich boy didn't stop him this time. The older woman gave him a final nod. See you soon, she said warmly. For the first time in a long while, the boy allowed himself to smile. Maybe. Just maybe? The world held something bigger for him. And this was only the beginning. Part 6 will be written here in approximately 1,700 words of simple, human-centric storytelling. No heading will be used. The day moved slowly after the moment the boy finished playing the piano, but the feeling in the room did not fade. People still looked at him with a mixture of surprise and wonder. Some guests whispered to each other, as if trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Others simply kept glancing back at the piano, as though the sound of his music still hung in the air. The boy, however, felt more overwhelmed than anyone else there. He had never stood in front of so many strangers, and he definitely had never expected applause in a house like this. He stood quietly near the corner of the room, unsure of what to do next. His hands still tingled from touching the smooth piano keys. The music teacher, the elderly woman who had encouraged him moments earlier, moved closer to him with a warm smile on her face. Her eyes were gentle and full of kindness, something the boy was not used to seeing from people dressed so nicely. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder and told him he had a gift, a natural ability that could grow into something much bigger if he chose to follow it. The boy listened carefully, though he had trouble believing her. No one had ever said such words to him. Most days he simply helped his mother with chores, did odd jobs to earn a little money, and tried not to draw too much attention to himself. Hearing that he had a talent felt strange, almost unreal. The host of the house approached them, his expression softer than before. He apologized for the way the boy had been spoken to earlier. He explained that most guests had never seen anything like what the boy had done, and the shock had simply come out in the wrong way. The boy nodded politely. He did not hold any anger in his heart. He had learned long ago that getting upset did not change anything. Still, inside him, something felt different, now a small spark of pride. It was not the kind of pride that made a person rude or boastful. It was a quiet, gentle feeling, the kind that warms the chest and makes a person feel seen. For the first time, he thought maybe he could be more than just the poor boy who helped with small tasks. Maybe he had something worth offering. The teacher then asked him how long he had been playing. When the boy told her it was his first time touching a real piano, she looked almost confused. She asked if he had ever taken lessons, and he shook his head. She asked if anyone at home played music, and again he shook his head. He explained that the only reason he knew anything about music was because he listened to street performers whenever he passed by them. Their melodies stayed in his mind, and sometimes, when he was alone, he hummed the tune softly. Sometimes he tapped rhythms on tables or walls. It made him feel peaceful. Hearing this, the teacher smiled again, but this time her smile carried a sense of determination. She told him that talent like his was rare. She said she had worked with students for many years, and some children trained for a long time without reaching the level of natural understanding he showed in just a few moments. She asked if he would be willing to learn from her lessons, guidance, and real training. The boy's eyes widened. He felt his heart beat faster, but not out of fear. It was excitement, something he had not felt in a long time. He looked down for a moment, unsure if he was allowed to accept such an offer. He wondered how much it would cost, how far he would have to travel, and whether his mother would approve. He worried that he might be stepping into something far too big for him. The teacher noticed his hesitation. She gently told him not to worry about money. She was offering her teaching for free. She believed in giving opportunities to young people who showed real promise but did not have the means to explore it. Her words felt almost unreal to the boy, like a story he might hear from someone else's life. But she was sincere. The rich boy, the one who had mocked him earlier, stood nearby, watching everything. His face looked different now. There was no smugness, no laughter. Instead, he looked unsure, almost embarrassed. He had seen the crowd's reaction. He had seen the boy's talent. And now he seemed to understand that the boy he had ridiculed had something special, something he himself did not have. After a few moments of awkward silence, the rich boy walked toward him. He cleared his throat and spoke quietly. He apologized for the way he behaved, admitting he had judged too quickly. The poor boy did not know what to say at first, but his gentle nature guided him. He accepted the apology with a small smile. He had no reason to hold on to anger. Life was already hard enough without carrying heavy feelings. The rest of the evening continued in a surprisingly warm way. Some guests approached the boy to compliment him or ask small questions. Others simply nodded at him as they passed, acknowledging him with respect. It was strange, but not in a bad way. For once, he did not feel invisible. When the event finally ended, the host arranged a ride home for him. The music teacher asked for directions to his house so she could visit his mother and discuss lessons. The boy agreed, though he felt nervous about anyone seeing where he lived. His home was simple, far from the polished, fancy world he had just visited. But he trusted the teacher's sincerity. On the quiet ride home, the boy looked out the window and thought about everything that had happened. He replayed the moment his fingers first touched the piano and how the instrument seemed to speak back to him. He remembered the silence in the room, the applause, the smiles, and the feeling that he had stepped into a new part of his life. He did not know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt it might be something bright when he reached home. His mother was surprised to see him driven back in a car that looked far too elegant for their neighborhood. She rushed out of their small home to meet him, worry quickly replaced by shock as she listened to the driver explain who had sent him. The boy tried to explain everything, but the events felt too big for simple words. His mother held his hands and listened, her eyes filling with emotion when he told her about the teacher's offer. She hugged him tightly, something she rarely did because she was often tired from work. She told him she was proud of him, more than words could say. She had always known he had a quiet spirit, a sharp mind, and a heart full of kindness. Now it seemed the world had seen it too. The next day, the music teacher visited their home. She spoke gently with the boy's mother, explaining her plan to teach him properly. She talked about discipline, practice, and the ability to grow a natural gift into a lifelong path. His mother agreed, grateful beyond measure. The lessons began soon after. The teacher would either come to their home with a small keyboard or arrange for the boy to visit her studio. Every lesson brought new challenges, but the boy worked hard. He practiced for hours, eager to learn everything he could. He discovered melodies he never knew he held inside himself. He learned to read notes, to understand rhythm, and to express emotion through sound. As months passed, his progress was astonishing. The teacher often told him that his journey was only just beginning. She encouraged him to dream bigger, to imagine a world where stages, concerts, and wider audiences might hear his music one day. The boy grew not only in skill, but also in confidence. The memory of being ridiculed that day no longer hurt him. Instead, it reminded him of how quickly life could change when someone believed in you, or when you believed in yourself. In time, he became known in his community as the young musician with a natural gift. People respected him, not because of wealth or status, but because of his character and dedication. His story spread quietly, the poor boy who touched the piano and surprised everyone, and as his journey continued, he carried with him a simple but powerful truth. Sometimes the world sees your worth only after you show it. But even before that moment, it already lives inside you, waiting for its chance to shine.